Welcome. Well, I hit live and the dog said hello. Go on outside, Dallas. Welcome back to the Be Ruthless Show. I'm your host, Sam Ruth, and joining me today is Jason Tuttle of Letters to Zachary or from Zachary?
Letters to Zachary.
To Zachary.
Yes, ma'am.
Such an important topic here as we head into a new month. It is National Bereaved Parents Month, such an appropriate time to be having this conversation. I apologize to everyone that the dogs decided to, make an appearance here. That's the world we live in these days. They're continuing. So thank you so much for being here with everything you have going on. Why don't you tell everyone where you are and a little bit more about you?
Well, I am right outside of the city of Atlanta. I'm still considered Metro Atlanta, but I'm literally 60 miles south of Atlanta, and I'm still considered Atlanta. Atlanta's taking over North Georgia is what Atlanta's doing. But I'm a married father, been married 22 years this year. I've got two kids. Both of them were born with a whole host of medical disabilities, being physical and cognitive. And then my son had a rare condition.
Tell us more about it.
Okay, so my son was born with a rare condition called Eagle-Barrett syndrome. At the time he was born, it was 1 in 40,000 births. When my wife and I got married, we gave it our honeymoon year, and then our second year we decided that we wanted to start having a family, and didn't take us long to get pregnant. And from the start up until about week 20, there were no issues, nothing. We had no reason to believe that we were going to have a child that had any medical disabilities. And in fact, at one point before the week 20 appointment, my wife pulls me to the side and says, what would happen if we had a child with like medical disabilities and all of those types of issues? And my response was, I said, if we have one, we're going to have one. We'll just, we'll deal with it as it comes, because, I'm not a proponent of other options, and I'll leave it at that. So we got to the week 20 appointment, and for those that don't know, that's typically the appointment you find out the sex of the child. And we get in there, and my wife's from the Northeast, and she doesn't want to know. That's life's last great surprise. I'm from the South, and I more or less want to know because I'm a planner, and I was the one putting the nursery together, and I wanted to cater it. Is kind of the reason why I want to know. And we get in there, and the ultrasound tech starts doing her thing, and she's, everything's checking out. We're still playfully going back and forth if we do or don't want to know. And so the tech finally goes, I'm at the point of finding out the sex of the child. Do you want to know? And so we're still kind of going back and forth. And before we can finish, she goes, well, I've found an issue. I need to know. And at that point, we said, we want to know. And she said, well, you're having a boy. And I immediately asked her, I said, hey, can you tell me what the issue is? And she comes back and says, well, that's kind of a doctor relayed issue, and I can't really tell you. And I said, okay, I understand that. I said, well, can you tell me, why did you need to know boy versus girl? And she comes back and says, well, if it's what I think it could be, it's rare in boys, but even rarer in girls. Eagle-Barrett syndrome is 97% male and 3% female. And that's what she was alluding to, that we didn't realize at the time. So from week 20 to week 38, when my wife gave birth, we went to go see a perinatologist, which is basically a high-risk OBGYN is what they do. They're the ones that come in and they do weekly ultrasounds, and they know about all the possible issues that may come up. And so they're the ones that we went to keep an eye on the issues that they thought that my son had. And throughout the next 18 weeks, they told us every terrible scenario you can think of. They told us, well, your son's going to be born with one kidney, which he was. Your son's going to be born with hydrocephalus, which is water on the brain. And luckily he was not. Your son's going to be born with a kidney that will have sustained some damage in utero, which he did. They listed several things, and as you can imagine, as first-time parents, and we're getting barraged with all these different things that we've never heard of, and so it was a lot to take in. We get to week 38. My wife has a C-section. She gives birth. For anybody that's had a child in a C-section, he was born, they wrapped him up, we saw him for about 30 seconds, and then they took him up to the NICU in the hospital we were in. And my wife went to recovery because of the epidural, and so I immediately went up to the NICU to see my son. And it was at that point that the NICU doctor said, well, your son was born with Eagle-Barrett syndrome. And I went, and what is this? And he told me. And after that, he goes, well, tomorrow what's going to happen is the local children's hospital on the north side of Atlanta is going to send their transport team down. They're going to come get him, put him in like one of their transport incubators, if you will. And they're going to take him up there because they're better equipped to deal with things that may arise up there versus what we can down here. And I said, okay. So the next day we got up and like I told all the doctors, I said, my wife has carried this child for 9 months and never really got to see him after birth. You are not leaving this hospital until my wife has at least a few moments with her son, period. And I'll give them credit. They were great. They came in, they stayed like 30 minutes. I mean, they stayed a good while. And from that point, my son was in the Children's Hospital in North Atlanta for the next 11 days or 12 days. And in that time, we got assigned 6 different specialist doctors. We were told of 5 different issues. Well, the rare condition, but also the possibility of 4 other conditions, which did turn out to be true. And that's kind of how our life started as a family.
Do they give you a translator, a therapist, somebody to just check on you and say, are you okay? Can we bring you something to a blanket? And like, is there somebody?
Not really, honestly. And like, I don't fault the hospital. I mean, I'll give you a good example. So at the time I was, my background's education. So I was teaching at the time. And I think at the time I was taking, in my county, they actually do have paternity leave. And so I was taking paternity leave. And like the Wednesday of that week, I went up there and I'll never forget it. I went up there and I got to my son's crib that was in the NICU. And I'm sitting there at one end, just kind of looking over the crib, just watching my son, just enjoying the moment. And the head nurse comes over to me and I hear her start talking, and she just lays just this cinder block worth of knowledge on me, like all the things that were going to go on and what they were going to do and how they were going to do it. And I remember she gets about halfway through it, and it hits me like a Mack truck, and I just start bawling. Like I just can't control it. It's just too much. And I'll give her credit. She paused and, she was consoling, and my parents were there and they were consoling. And like, I went down to lunch and got lunch and sitting at the table, I just started bawling again. Cause it was just like, what am I going to do? How am I going to take care of this? How am I going to provide? And kind of at least one of the male thoughts is, what's this going to cost? Am I going to be able to afford it to be able to provide it? And, I had 1,000 things going through my head at that point. And, after 11 days, we got sent home with some precautionary things. And for the next several months, we had a lot of doctor's visits.
And it is no fault to the hospital. They are doing the best they can. They're taking care of and doing what they're trained to do. But you and I now doing what we do in this grief world, I sit and I think, even when I go in for an x-ray or, anything, like, why is there not somebody here helping all of the people dealing with anxiety or all of the emotional stuff that's going on while everyone else is dealing with the medical.
Yeah. And definitely, I'm not here to say what a family of a neurotypical child goes through, but definitely the families that have kids with special needs, because typically most families that have a child with a special need, it's not just one issue, it's a group of issues. Like it was, like for example, my son, the final count of issues was he was born with Eagle-Barrett syndrome. That was a huge urological issue and a respiratory related issue. It was one of the reasons why he was always in the hospital in his life. He was born nonverbal. He was born with severe developmental delays, which means at 15 years old, he functioned about 7 years old. Um, he could walk with assistance, but he was in a sense wheelchair bound because he couldn't walk on his own. He developed epilepsy, so he had seizures. And so all of those issues were the issues that he had, and none of them, like some issues, you can get one issue and there's a possibility you can get another issue related to that first. None of the issues my son had were related to any of the other. There were 5 different issues. They had no connections.
And those all have emotional implications for him and everyone else in the house.
Exactly. And it was, to put it simplistically, it was a lot of trial and error that first 5 or 6 years. It was a lot of basically taking things and throwing it into the wall and see what stuck. There was a lot of, it was a very steep uphill learning curve is what it was. Because up until about year 5, once I got to year 5, I knew all the physical signs. I knew the patterns. I knew what the main issue was, and I knew what the possibility of the secondary issue was. But up until that point, everything was a surprise because I hadn't seen it before. And so there was a lot of stress in that first 5 years.
What about with your daughter now? If she sniffles or has a hiccup?
Well, my daughter, funny you should ask about her. So we had our son. He was 2, I think. He 1 or 2, and then we always knew we wanted to have another one. And so my wife and I decided we were going to have another one. Well, as you can imagine, we got some pushback from some family that said, "Why would you want to have another one when you've got one that's got so many issues?" And I'm a researcher. And so everything I had researched basically said, just because one child there's no guarantee that the second one's going to have any of these issues. So we proceeded forward. Didn't take us long. Wife got pregnant and my daughter was born. Well, at least in the beginning, she was, and I hate to say it this way, but she was the normal child, because at least in the beginning, she seemed like she was progressing normally. Well, at about 6 months, she got tested for the Peabody Skills Assessment test that they do on children that basically kind of tell parents on the different levels of where they should be in their progression, where your child is. Well, they basically told us, your daughter, we professionally believe that your daughter is delayed and we think she needs professional help. And the thing that I said next to him, I said in the heat of the moment at that time, and I had since apologized to the women that gave the test, but I had so much going on when they told me that my brain couldn't handle it. And I literally looked at him and said, "Pack your shit and get out of my house." I mean, my brain just shut down. Now, I since apologized to him and said, "It's not your fault. You just happened to be the straw that broke the camel's back, and you had no idea." And so we then started having my daughter see the neurologist, like her brother, and our pediatrician who has a special needs child said, "I tend to agree with him. You may want to start seeing a neurologist." Well, fast forward a couple of years. My daughter was born with every single condition her brother had, except for the rare condition. severe neurological delays, nonverbal, epilepsy. She was wheelchair bound. And to this day, genetics does not understand why we had two kids born almost 2 years apart to the day have identical issues, because there's no genetic connection for it.
What do you and how do you get through it together? Because you're together and so many fall apart, right?
Well, I have a weird kind of odd sense of humor, sarcastic, probably somewhat dark. And a lot of it was humor getting through it, because it was one of those, like the old saying goes, if I don't laugh about it, I'm just going to cry about it. And like one day I came over to my wife, I think after my daughter was born, I said, the statistic of a family that has one special needs child, the divorce rate is like 70%. And I said, we have two. So does that make us 140% divorce rate? And she goes, I don't know, it might. And, I have run across a lot of families where special needs and medical issues have just torn the family apart. They've gotten divorced. Whereas we kind of looked at it like nobody in a 1,000-mile radius knew exactly what we were dealing with, the combination of issues that we had with our kids. So we took it as kind of a us against the world kind of mentality. And I put my nose to the grindstone. I started researching. I did all the physical medical care because, I didn't mind doing the medical stuff. I could do all the lifting. I could do that kind of stuff. So, for example, my son with his respiratory related issues, he had 5 respiratory machines that he had in his room that I knew how to use all of them, so that when I started hearing that cough that I knew that was so familiar, I went through my medical protocol and I tried to catch it fast enough so that he wouldn't be in the hospital. But as it turned out, for the first 6 years of his life, every 6 months we were in the hospital because of respiratory related illnesses.
We've learned to turn pain into power, turn our weaknesses into strength. So I do feel like what the world sees as a limitation, you must have turned into your family superpower somehow.
Yeah, I jokingly tell people, I said I was given a God-given ability to be stubborn, and just because I wasn't going to take no for an answer, especially to doctors. And the famous story around me that I tell people all the time is one day we were trying to get a diagnosis of epilepsy for my son because we needed it for like government assistance. And the neurologist would not give us the diagnosis. And so what neurology tells you is when you that first seizure, they call it kind of a freebie seizure. And they call it that because it could be an anomaly, and they don't really start doing anything till it becomes a pattern. So for weeks, we were having patterns of having what they called twitching episodes. They didn't call them seizures. And one of the times I went in there, the female neurologist on her wall had a poster of the 6 different kinds of seizures. Well, number 2 was the exact same thing that was happening to him every time it happened. And she kept refusing and refusing and refusing. So finally, I booked an appointment and I went in there one day, and my wife was there because she can collaborate with me. And the neurologist comes and she goes, how are y'all doing? Good. We're doing all right. And before she ever started, I said, I have a question for you. And she goes, what's that? And I said, what is Keppra? And she goes, it's a medication to either stop or maintain seizure activity. And I said, now a lot of medications have multiple uses. Do you use Keppra for anything other than seizure activity? She said, no, we do not. And I said, good, I'm glad you stated it that way. I said, because we've been trying for the last 6 months to get you to diagnose my son as epileptic because we need that diagnosis for his care. And I said, you refuse to diagnose him. And I said, what that tells me is, so now that you've refused to diagnose him, he has been wrongly medicated on a neurological medication for 6 months because you refuse to diagnose him. And I said, if that's the case, in my opinion, that's the very definition of medical malpractice. And I said, I have my lawyer on speed dial. So if you don't diagnose him as epileptic because it's number 2 on your wall, I said, you will be hearing from my lawyer. And she like jaw dropped. She didn't know what hit her. And I said, this is the end of the appointment. I said, I will give you to the end of business day to call me back and tell me that he has epilepsy because all of this is in his records. Well, we didn't even make it out of the parking lot. And his nurse called us and said, the doctor has decided to diagnose your son as epileptic. And I said, I need that in writing and I need it sent to me by the end of the week. And so that was kind of the mentality I took with him. I've told several doctors over the years that, like I told one, and it was another neurologist. I said, what am I paying you for? I could Google what you know. Now, granted, she eventually dropped us because she didn't like my bluntness to her. But, that's kind of the us against the world mentality that we took on with our kids.
That's the mentality I take on for my clients for healing. Mm-hmm. I had somebody's insurance say they couldn't work with me. They only wanted to work with me. We're going to fight it. They win. Of course, you get to work with who, but people don't know. People don't know that they have the right to have these conversations, to stand up for themselves, to say to a doctor, this is what I've learned. So until we hit the walls, until we have these traumas and we're in this much pain and we fight back because we have no other choice. We're walking around living life the way we're told. And so you and I are doing this because we don't want people to follow rules that are not serving them.
Exactly.
So how do we help people understand that just because someone is doing the best they can, maybe has a degree or a license, what you're told isn't always what's true.
And whether it's special needs world or the grief world, I tell everybody, I said, look, when you enter these world, there's a steep uphill learning curve and it's a progression. And in the beginning, typically we're all timid, and anybody with any knowledge, we accept it for their word as law. And then once we start getting there and getting our footing and start understanding what's going on, we start getting a little more, well, wait a minute, that's not how it's supposed to be. What is option B and C? And I said, eventually you're going to get to the point of going, yes, I will take the doctor's advice under kind of consultation. But at the end of the day, just because you have a degree on the wall doesn't make you God's gift of medicine either. And I say that even in the grief world, going, when it comes to grief, you've got to get to the point that you want help. Until you get to that point, it doesn't matter what I say to you, what you say to them, or anybody else. You have to want it. And when you do, you have your choice. And just like therapists and counselors, you might go to one and think that they think they're God's gift to counseling and go, no, you're not it. I said, you have to make that decision. But it comes after kind of a learning process.
And let's add mental illness into this. Let's add physical, any controversial subject falls into this category. If you are a minor and you're in therapy and your parents are making you see someone and you don't like who you're seeing, you still can have a vote and ask them to take you to see someone else.
Exactly.
I want my minors to get to pick if they're coming in the afternoon or on a weekend. You're getting a service and you have a vote. And just because somebody's the professional or the teacher, you should have a say. So you have to be ready for it. You have to want the help.
Exactly.
So when things come crashing down, how do you go from losing it all to turning it into a way to help others? Because I learned something I didn't know. You have a coloring book on your website.
I do.
You are doing things to help other families who have been through loss, but you lived it before the loss.
Well, to backtrack just a slight bit, what I didn't realize in the time when my son was born was I realize now that when my son was born, I was grieving his birth. And what I mean by that is the life that I thought we were going to get versus the life that we got. And so what I didn't realize in that beginning was I was grieving the life that we had lost. Not that I regretted the life that we had. It was just one expectation was different than what I got. And so that was a lot to take in, especially with just all the medical issues on top of that. In both instances, I will admit, and typically when it comes to emotional response, men's first response is almost always anger, always. And when my son was born and when my son passed away, I dealt with a lot of internal anger. It wasn't necessarily directed at anybody, but it hit me hard on both scenarios. Now with my son, when he passed, passing unto itself is a lot to deal with. But that morning that he passed, I was the one that woke him up. I was the one that checked him out. I took him up to the hospital. I was literally in that ER trauma room while they worked to save his life from the moment he walked in there to the moment he died right in front of me. I was there the whole time. So I witnessed all that. And at least right afterwards, some people said, well, you kind of sound like you got some PTSD. And I went, I don't think it, but the more I've looked back on it, I went, yeah, I probably did. And as a man, we learned very early on that you've got to compartmentalize things, and especially in a scenario like that. But to get through it, at least after my son passed, it was a lot of compartmentalization. It was a lot of, and typically if I know I'm at a moment where I just can't handle things, I will tell my wife, I need to walk off for a minute because I know it's coming. And if I'm going to get upset or angry, I'd rather be in the garage by myself. Like if I want to punch a hole through the drywall versus being in here and taking it out on someone else, because it's emotion related to that, but I don't want it to be misguided. And I would rather walk off and blow off steam and then come back and go, I had a moment, I'm better now, than to guide it any other direction. But as it relates to what I'm doing now, I'm a big proponent of counseling and therapy. And the irony of, I'd been seeing a therapist for literally a year. And like 2 weeks before my son passed, I literally stopped with my last session. I'd called her up and said, hey, I think this therapy season has run its course. I don't think I've got enough to talk about for an hour once a week or even once a month at this point. I'm going to stop seeing you. I said, should something come up, I'll call back. I'll get on your waiting list, that kind of thing. She said, okay. Well, 2 weeks later, the proverbial S hit the fan. And I immediately called her up and said, hey, I need an emergency session. I don't want to talk about it over the phone. You'll understand when I'm in your office. And luckily she was able to get me in, and it started another year at that point because of everything that had happened. But in one of those sessions, she looks at me and she goes, have you ever thought about journaling? And the irony of my response is I looked at her and said, I don't know if I'm that great of a writer. I don't know if writing is my thing. And so she goes, well, it's more of a mindfulness activity. It's to get it off of you more than anything. And she goes, put it on your mental back burner. You can come back to it at any time and start doing it. Well, I put it on my mental back burner for 9 months after that point because I resisted it. I fought it. I didn't want to do it. Well, as the story goes, one day I'm sitting on my couch. Of all things, I'm watching a Facebook reel. And honestly, I don't remember what it was even about. Something in that video either reminded me of my son or an aspect of my son. And when I saw it, it hit me like a punch to the gut. Like I started just ugly crying, like uncontrollable. And I gathered my senses about me and I opened up my laptop and I opened a Word document and I, in proper letter writing form, because I wouldn't do it any other way, I verbally vomited on it like 2 pages, just wrote out all my feelings of what was going through, how it made me, everything. And for some strange reason, which I'm thankful I did, that first time I saved it into a folder. To this day, I don't know why I did it. Something in my brain that I didn't recognize said, save it in a folder. You're going to use this later. And so I did that. And every time I wrote a letter, I would save it in my folder and keep doing it. And what happened was I got into one of the Facebook groups, because Facebook has a group for everything. And I got to know the female admin in that group very well. So one day I DM'd her and I said, hey, do you mind if I post a journal entry? And literally before I could finish, she goes, yes, we would love for you to. She said, we either never get men in here doing that or very rarely. And so I picked one of the letters out and I copy and pasted it. And I was just about to hit send and I paused for a minute. And in my head, I go, am I in the mental space to be able to take the comments I may get on this piece? Even though it's noble to do as a man to share my emotions, it's still the internet. And even though a lot of people may like it, I may still get some negative comments to it. And how am I going to react? Because I don't necessarily want to jump down someone's throat because they're not agreeing with what I'm feeling. And so I thought about it and in my response, I went, screw it. I'm going to do it anyway. And so I did. And I literally waited all day. I didn't get any response. And finally that evening, I just all of a sudden, I got all this response. I went, well, here we go. And I opened in there and literally every response in there was this massively positive response. And the one I'll never forget was this lady that I knew her in the group, but I didn't really know her. And she goes, we've never met. We've never crossed paths. I have never told anybody how I've truly felt about the loss of my son. I've never told anybody what's deep down inside. And she said, I just read your letter. And she said, you hit word for word exactly everything I'm feeling in the tone in which I'm feeling it. And I went, well, I appreciate the fact that you like it. I'm glad it resonates with you. I said, it was inspired by my son. And, this is just how I feel. Like since then, I've told people, I said, I don't sugarcoat things, period. I believe that people need to see the good, the bad, and the ugly when it relates to grief and the emotion it produces. And so what I mean by that is in those letters, if I felt like I needed to drop an F-bomb because that's how I was feeling in that moment, that's how I wrote it. If I felt like talking about a dark moment I had thought about, because honestly, I think it's a natural reaction when you lose a child that you might want to go with them per se. And I think it's healthy to have a few to go along with that. Now, if you start getting obsessed with it, that's when it becomes an issue. And so like I would tell people, if I feel like that's what I'm feeling like, that's what I'm gonna write about it. If you do, in a nice blunt fashion, I basically said to people, if you don't like it, I don't care. This is how I'm dealing with my situation. If you resonate with it, great. If you disagree with it, that's fine. It's not for you to agree with. And so that was the foundation that started Letters to Zachary. And from there, I first started a Facebook page and kind of gained a following. And then I decided, well, I want to expand it a little bit. So I then went to Instagram because at that point I was actually making memes myself and writing commentary to it. And so I did that on Instagram. And as I was doing Instagram and the Facebook page, I went, I kind of want to do a short form videos. So that's when I joined TikTok and I started doing TikTok. And even today at the age that I'm at, I've never thought I would be on TikTok, but here we are. So I did all those for a long while, and somewhere in between TikTok and doing the coloring book, I thought, if I really want this to go somewhere, I really need to have a professional website, because everybody's going to say, well, do you have a website? And I need to create that. And so from that point, I created a professional website. And at this point, I'm the Facebook page, Instagram, TikTok, a professional website. And then I've done more podcasts and things than probably most people can even think of.
Yeah. And it's all to let other people know they're not alone, to find your way through it, to maybe connect with somebody else. I love letting people know that journaling doesn't have to be Dear Diary. Uh,
No.
I write letters to Jim every day because I still feel like I need to
Mhm.
fill him in on what happened. And so it's the same thing.
Mhm.
It's my way of keeping in touch with him, and what those, where those go or who reads them, that's up to me, but you can do it any way you want to. And so
Mhm.
that's what Letters to Zachary, how it originated, and look at what it's turned into. So,
Well, and I also tell people when people kind of balk at journaling like I did in the beginning, I would say, okay, don't think of it as journaling. Let's say you go to your loved one's gravesite and you talk to them for an hour, write that out. You're still journaling to your loved one, but the only difference is you're talking to them, you're not writing it down. It's the same thing. And that's what I try to relate to them. I will say initially, Letters to Zachary was specifically geared towards men. And the reason why I did that was because when I started looking for groups, I got really frustrated that every group I got in was 99%, and nothing against the women, but 99% women and 1% men. And even of that 1%, none of those men ever really responded. They kind of lurked, they kind of read things, but they never responded. And so I wanted to create a safe space or a place where men could feel vulnerable and not feel like it was going to get thrown back at them. But over time, it has evolved of sure it's men, but now it's men um, and women. And it's women that are grieving, but the caveat that I put for women is if you come to my page or whether it's on social media or my website, the goal for me to you is to teach you or to get you to understand how men grieve, what causes us to grieve, and the hurdles we have to overcome to grieve. And like one of the pieces that I wrote in one of my journal entries was I came up with what did I call it? The 10 commandments of male grief, to give women an idea of what men deal with just to be able to grieve. And that was a huge hit. That was just, it was one day I got the idea in my head. I thought, I'm very open to my wife and my wife's open to me, but I thought if I weren't, what could I tell my wife to have her make the scenario more welcoming to get me to open up, is kind of the thought behind it. And I just rattle them off of just things I thought that would help for that. So, but yeah, Letters to Zachary is now more all encompassing. It's men, it's women, it's teenagers, young adults. It's some, if you've lost a spouse or a child or a sibling or maybe a very close friend, that kind of thing. It's anybody dealing with significant loss.
talk a little bit about the coloring book, because healing through creative outlets is a real thing. And so for people who are looking for different ways to get it out, this is a beautiful option.
Well, this is the coloring book. It's just like my logo. That's my son on the front. It's called Letters to Zachary. Um, the thought process behind it was, well, first of all, who doesn't love to color? And nowadays, adult coloring is popular because a lot of the adult people that color are my age, Generation X, that we grew up on it. And I'm not saying it's our generation that brought it back, but it's a lot of us that do the adult coloring. So, but the thought process was, who doesn't love coloring? And then when I was trying, my daughter's a little different in the sense of she has developmental delays, but as I was trying to simplistically tell her what had happened to her brother, I thought, what's an easy way that I can make a connection with my daughter that can be a mindfulness activity, a de-stressing activity while we're talking about such a difficult topic? And then that's when the idea of, well, everybody likes to color. And so that was how that came about. Now, one thing I will say about the coloring book, every entry, and now several of them are my entries because I'm the namesake of it, but every other entry outside of mine is someone that I have met online or in person that has actively lost either a child or a spouse or someone of that nature that's in this book. I know every person that's been in this book. And then, so what happened was they sent information off to the publisher. The publisher combined all the information together and made a coloring book page. And it was either a collage or a scene of what they gave that person. And then on the back of that page, it was the name of their child, a positive attribute about them, and kind of where they were from. And I did that because in fact, let me show you one. Like this one right here is the one my father did for his grandson. And then over here, if you can see on there, was what was written about him in there. And it was, I knew that one day when my number is called, I wanted something tangible that I could hold, that could be on life's bookshelf, if you will. And the people that have loved ones in here, I told them, I said, the great thing about this is now you have a tangible thing you can hold. It doesn't replace your loved one, but it's something you can have to remind you of them. And it's a living memorial for your child that will outlast you, will outlast me, that will forever be there. And I said, what better? I said, if you're trying to create a legacy for your child, what better way to do that than have a book in Amazon or Books a Million or one of those places that's sitting on a bookshelf that anybody and their brother that's dealing with grief can find and purchase.
So all of this, the coloring book, we will talk about your shirts in 1 second, but all of this is at letterstozachary.com.
It is. It's at letterstozachary.com. I believe it's the third section down. It's got a small thing and a description, and the button right under. If you press that button, it takes you directly to the Amazon page.
Talk about the shirts.
The shirts for me were. It was another tangible thing, but it was one of those things I thought, one, how can I get the word out about the website? And like, as you can tell from this, I will talk to anybody. But if I wanted to just walk out and about and kind of advertise it and not say a word, then I could wear a t-shirt out there like a lot of us do for the businesses we've gone to. And it's got the website right up under it. Give me just a second, I'll find one. In fact, it's the exact same logo, same color. That's what's on it. So if someone were to look at it, I wouldn't even have to tell them. I wouldn't even have to tell them the website. It's right there. What's that? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm good. So I did that more so.
Have had a little technology glitch here. Can you hear me?
I can. It's a little muffled.
I can't hear you, and my computer is being weird, and the time has stopped. Here we are.
It's fine on my side.
So, I don't know if I'm talking over you, if you're talking over me. Anybody can hear me, or if I have been cut off completely. My computer is going wacky. Next is Jason at letterszachary.com. Shirts are there, the coloring books are there. Money for the shirt goes to Grief Education, his website, getting the word out there, all of these important conversations. I don't know if I'm talking to myself, talking to you, talking over anyone, but I am having Wi-Fi issues. So thank you for being here, everyone. Until next time, always be ruthless. recording, everyone. So pardon me for all the chaos.